All right, so our next talk is Kathy Liu talking about being the first user researcher on her product team. And, you got the clicker.
I have a clicker. Awesome. So I'm going to give people a second to get settled and grab your coffee and settle in. Awesome. So hi, everyone. Thanks for sticking around until 3:30 to listen to my talk. So thanks for coming to my talk today. I'm going to be talking to you about when you don't want to jump headfirst into user research. So actually a little bit about me before we get started. You're probably wondering, who am I? What am I doing up here talking to you? So my name is Kathy Liu, and I'm a UX researcher at CBRE Build, which is a real estate company based in New York City. So I've actually been working in applied research since 2011 and in the UX industry since 2013. I started with human factors, working in research in synthetic biology, and now I work in commercial real estate. So, life takes you places. And as with many researchers, such as yourselves and also designers, I've worked in a variety of different industries before. So I worked in science publishing. I've also worked in HR and talent management, and also fintech and financial services. And about 5 months ago, I joined a company called CBRE Build as a UX researcher. So get it? Commercial real estate, the hard hat? Okay. Okay, cool. So I got a question yesterday, what is CRBE? Oh, sorry, it's actually CBRE. So what is CBRE? CBRE is short for Coldwell Banker Richard Ellis, and it's the largest commercial real estate company in the entire world. So if you've probably, if you've done any sort of commercial real estate deal, you've probably heard of CBRE. And CBRE is in over 100 companies. We've been around for over 115 years, and we have offices in over 480 locations. So a huge, huge company. So just show of hands here. How many people have been inside this building, the Freedom Tower? Okay, cool. Awesome. If not, I suggest you go in. And how many of you have seen this, which is the Hudson Yards construction? Okay, cool. So if you live in New York City, it's hard to miss these iconic buildings. Well, if you ever considered leasing an office in either of those buildings, CBRE would have been the brokerage firm that was representing you, either as a landlord or as a tenant. And not only these buildings, but we're also a brokerage representing a lot of these buildings. So I don't actually work as a broker. I work as a researcher. That's why I'm here. I actually work on the tech arm of CBRE, which is called CBRE Build. We have a completely different branding. We used to be Floored, and we got acquired by CBRE about 5 or 6 years ago. And we spearhead a lot of the commercial real estate and digital product innovations in the company. So we try to build products to help brokers, tenants, landlords, facilities managers, and also developers make better day-to-day decisions when it comes to commercial real estate. So you're probably wondering, okay, but what does CBRE actually build? Yeah, so here's some tools that I actually build in New York City. So this is actually a spacer. A spacer is a tool that you can use to determine how much office space that you actually need. So say that you have a team of 25 people, you have a team of 100 people, and you're trying to figure out how much office space do I need to co-work with these people, then you can use spacer to determine what's the setup. You can also use plans then. Plans is another product to help you test fit the layout of the office. And finally, once you figure out the layout of the office, you can use Build 3D, which is a 3D rendering tool that we have. So you can do like a walkthrough of a space. So you go all the way from not knowing what your office layout is to knowing what your layout is to imagining yourself in this layout. Pretty cool, right? So actually, CBRE doesn't do just office spaces. We also do industrial, and we do retail. So 5 months ago, when I joined CBRE Build, I actually joined the industrial and shipping logistics team. And the team was really excited to have a researcher. So the team had actually never worked with a researcher before, and they were super, super excited. as early as the first day, I had the engineering lead come up to me during lunch and was like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited. We have a researcher. We have a dedicated researcher to my team. Like, I'm going to stalk you and ask you a bunch of questions. And just really excited. And they were saying, we want you to help us with everything, from usability testing to surveys to pilots to like everything. We're just going to bombard you with questions. And as a researcher, I appreciated that because I enjoy being asked questions. And I also couldn't wait to get started, right? You want to work with a team that's super enthusiastic, that wants research, that wants to work with you. So I was like, yeah, I'm going to take their research knowledge from 0 to 100. I'm going to immerse myself in commercial real estate and know about industrial brokers. Like, let's go. Well, fast forward 3 months. Things were not going as imagined. So what was going on? Well, a couple of things were happening. The first thing was that the PM actually didn't necessarily appreciate research. He thought that research was slowing down the velocity of the team. He was nervous because he was the one doing research before, and suddenly we had an actual researcher come in to do research. So he got nervous, and he wanted to take over interviews, and he wanted to ask questions, and he was just like, I'm not in control, what's going on? The designer also got nervous because before, he and the PM would confer together and talk about the insights. It would literally just be the two of them on the team. They would do a session and say, hey, here's what we learned, let's run with it. But now that you have a researcher, you have process, you have more rigor, you have standards, and the team just wasn't used to that. And also, they didn't understand certain terminologies, such as debrief sessions or synthesis, and they're like, where's this all going, right? And of course, the perfect storm is that you have interns. So we also had a PM intern and a design intern work with us during the summer. And one of their goals of their internship was that they had to execute on a research plan and do research. And so they were confused about how to even get started because they had never done any research before. So not only was I training the PM and the designer, but also 2 interns within the first 3 months. So just a show of hands, how many of you have ever been in this situation where you're struggling with a PM, you're struggling with a designer, or you're struggling to train interns? Okay, for all the people who didn't raise your hands, I want to talk to you afterwards because you must know something that I don't know. Like, teach me things, yes. So actually, while preparing for this talk and bouncing ideas off of my peers, I realized that a lot of people struggle with this, right? I'm not alone. Other people struggle with similar situations where you are trying to advocate for the role of user research, but also train up your designers, train up your PMs, and also your interns. And honestly, it's a really hard thing to talk about, because if you're the first researcher on this product team, you want to admit that you can rise up to the challenge, that you can do all the things that's necessary to do research as part of the product development lifecycle. And it's hard to admit as an empathetic, detail-oriented, and also an experienced researcher that I was struggling with stakeholder management. And I just think that, to kind of clarify, as a field, I think we don't talk enough about our failures. I think we stand up here and we say, we're super successful, we're really awesome, we're experienced, but sometimes we don't always get it on the first try. So that's what I'm gonna share about today. So while trying to figure out how to best engage with my team, I had the luck of going out and talking to some actual industrial brokers. And we talked to a broker who talked to us about his client engagement process. So he actually said that earlier on in his career, he would chase down every single deal, right? So whether or not it's a mom and pop shop or a Fortune 500 company, he would put the same amount of time and effort into each of those pursuits. But then over time, he realized, wait a minute, I'm not getting the rate of return that I want. I should only put in effort where it's necessary or where I think it's appropriate to match the level of client engagement there was. So it was really important for him to identify how much effort to put into each of the pursuit as quickly as possible so he can save time and resources. So it turned out, the funny thing was that the way he identified how to engage with the client or how much effort to put in was whether or not they brought up crane availability during their initial discussion. I know some of you are like, wait, what? So cranes, whether or not you have cranes in a warehouse or not. If they did, he immediately knew that maybe the client didn't really know what they wanted, or they needed more hand-holding, and he needed to do more due diligence with explaining the process to the client. So literally for him, seeing cranes means that he needed to do more heavy lifting with the client. Yeah, so this got me thinking, heavy lifting, right? So this got me thinking, how can we apply the same rule of thumb to UX readiness, right? To identify when a team is actually ready for research or not. That is, what are our cranes as an industry? What are the signs that we need to do more heavy lifting to increase a team's UX readiness or research readiness? So with that in mind, this is the talk that I wish I gave myself 5 months ago when I first started a CBRE Build, because this talk is going to be filled with tips on how you can figure out really quickly your team's UX readiness or research readiness, and what you can do to get them ready for research. So if you're an experienced researcher, or you're a team of one, or you're a designer who wants to pivot into research, or you are just somebody who's new to a team and you want to get started quickly to get a sense of the lay of the land, then this is a talk for you. Okay, so here are my 8 cranes. I know that we all love our takeaways and the phones will come out. So yes, so here, all the phones, okay. So here are actually my 8 cranes or takeaways in terms of identifying UX readiness, 8 things that I did. So the first thing I did was understand the current organizational context. Then I clarified motivation and incentive structures. I found allies in the team or the organization. I provided thought leadership. I set clear expectations with the team in terms of how to engage with research. I met people where they're at. I try to become a trusted advisor, and I try to show the value of research over time. Everybody got their photo? There's gonna be a slide at the end too. Okay. Don't worry, this is not, yeah. Okay, so the first thing was I wanted to understand the current organizational context, right? So in the organization you work in, it might be that research is not the center of the universe. Well, most likely than not, UX research is not the center of the universe, but something is. So it's your goal as a user researcher on your first day to jump in and quickly identify what is actually the center of the universe, right? Like try to understand the organizational culture. How much does your org actually value user research? How much does your org even value product development? Like digital product development. In a company like CBRE Build or CBRE, when you're building buildings and actual physical buildings, how important is something like software? Well, that's a good thing to know right away. So I knew that this was going to be an issue because I heard things like this, right? Let's go for small wins first. We still need buy-in from other business stakeholders in the org and not just end user feedback. How many people have heard those before? Let's go for small wins. Yeah? Yes, exactly. So what that tells you, if you hear something like that, is that people might not know how to engage with user research, or they don't know where to place user research in terms of the rest of the organization. So here are 3 things that I did to understand the organizational context that I was working in. The first thing is I looked at the reporting structure of the company, right? So where does user research ladder up to? Who are we matrixed up to? What about design? What about product management? Is it the same people or is it different people, right? Something that we noticed was that the business single points of contacts or the business stakeholders didn't ladder up to the same person as research, PMs, and design. So that means that we needed to do extra heavy lifting to get them to buy into the research process. The second thing was I observed communications on key initiatives. So that takes the forms of town halls, emails from senior leadership, Q&A sessions, or just informal conversations with other stakeholders to try to understand what are the most important initiatives for CBRE for 2019 and also 2020. And of course, if I knew what the initiatives are, then you try to pivot your research in a way so that you can align the key initiatives with that research that you're actively doing. Right? Because if you're doing research on something and people can't understand how it aligns to key initiatives, then they won't associate the word strategic with user research. And your goal is to get them to think that user research is strategic as quickly as possible. So the second thing I did was I clarified the motivation incentive structure for the team. So I like to say, if you give a mouse a cookie, it'll want a glass of milk. What do you need to give to your designers or your PMs so that they come back to do more user research with you? I don't know. Maybe it's cookies, right? So you need to figure out what the motivation and incentive structure is for your team and whether or not they're rewarded for moving slowly and deliberately and thinking strategically or for moving fast and breaking things. And if your values as a user researcher don't align with those of the organization, then something will have to give. So I knew that this potentially would be a crane or a challenge and that I needed to do more heavy lifting because I heard things like, there's no way of measuring the impact of research. Also, doing user research will slow down our velocity. We need to move fast, right? So if you hear something like that, that tells you that there's a misalignment between what incentivizes you as a researcher and what incentivizes the team at large. So what did I do to address this? Well, to clarify the motivation and incentive structure for the team, I did 3 different things. The first thing was I actually looked at the written and agreed upon OKRs, the written and also verbal OKRs. I immediately went up to the PM and designer and asked them, was research part of the talk when it comes to something like metrics and OKRs? Was there a metric associated with user engagement or user satisfaction? Or is it all about, you're moving quickly through the sprint and you're finishing delivering on certain features? And because there wasn't an OKR related to user engagement and satisfaction and feedback, and there wasn't one regarding integrating user research into the process, I was able to slowly over time persuade the PM and the designer to put those OKRs, so that the next time, for the next quarter, we were able to quantify the impact of user research. Because we can say, yes, we've successfully integrated user research into the process, and here is a level of how much we've achieved. The second thing was I looked at what is emphasized as success by the team, right? Is success for your team delivering on a certain number of points during a sprint, or is it actually solving key user needs and wants? Is it about, let's just move fast and break things and not document anything? Or is it about, let's move slowly and deliberately so that in 8 to 10 months, we're not gonna come back and redesign or re-engineer the entire feature again, right? So knowing that will help you understand where you're starting out with. And also another thing is you wanna observe if there's room to even respond to research. So something that I noticed was that when the team was, when I was coming in as a researcher, the team didn't even have bandwidth to respond to research. They wanted to integrate research as part of the process, but they were just moving at such a velocity that they couldn't slow down and pause and consider the insights that were coming in. So if your team is moving too fast, the conversation has to be around, how can we slow down? How can we have conversations around user research and think strategically and not just about what's being delivered the next day? So the third thing that I did was I found allies in the team and the organization. I think this is like the 3rd or the 4th talk today about finding allies. So in case you didn't get the memo, it's really important to find allies in the team and the organization. So instead of trying to execute user research on your own, I think it's really important to leverage existing relationships in the organization and try to find ways that other disciplines can leverage, can elevate the role of user research. So it'll be much easier if you are not the one that has to champion UX or user research, because other people in the org have done some of that legwork for you. So I knew that this was gonna be a challenge because I heard things like, design a product, we'll meet to discuss the roadmap and let everyone know what happens. Well, what that tells me is that product and design work together, and that design actually does have a seat at the table. But because research wasn't incorporated in the process yet, maybe research didn't yet. So knowing that, I knew that I needed to lean on my design ally to be heard in this team. So what are some things that I actually did to find allies in the team or the organization? Well, the first thing I did was I immediately did informational interviews within my first week to understand the team's attitudes, right? We knew that the Eng lead was really excited about research. He came up to me, said all these things, he wanted to engage. But how did the PM feel? How did the designers feel? What about the rest of the organization? What was the organization's history with user research? What is, the existing mood in the air, if it will? Because now you know what the current context is and where you can start working on things. The next thing I did was I looked for natural allies on the team, right? So these are the people who, if you did your work well as a researcher, they also benefited. So those are people like data scientists or product marketing specialists or UX designers and interaction designers or even client service representatives. try to figure out what that is for your organization, and then buddy up with them. Because if you did your work well as a researcher, and they can thrive as well. And the third thing I did was I asked those allies to advocate for research, right? Because I'm not in every single meeting. I can't clone myself and be in like 5 different meetings at once. Then everybody else has to think about research as top of mind too. So if I talk to somebody in design or somebody in data science or somebody in product marketing, anybody else who was interested in user research, whenever they had a meeting, they can say, hey, this is something related to research. Maybe you should talk to the researcher about it. But also, something that the designer and I figured out was the PM sometimes didn't listen to me as a researcher because I was a researcher, not because of me, but because I was a researcher and he was uncomfortable with the fact of research, or because I was new to the organization and he just didn't understand how to work with me. So we figured out a communication tactic where if I wasn't getting my point across, that I would look at the designer, like make some sort of hand signal, and he would repeat exactly what I said in his own words until the PM heard me. This was actually pretty effective, so if you have to do this, definitely do it. Yeah. So the fourth thing I did was I tried to provide thought leadership whenever possible, right? So thought leadership is really in 2 categories. What kind of things can I do now? What kind of things can I immediately do to provide, actionable items and insights for the team? And what kind of things can I work with the team on for, a roadmap or something super nebulous and ill-defined for the future? So once you've proven the value of user research, and there's enthusiasm for research as an expertise, you can sit down to build a longer-term strategic plan for scalable research. So I knew that this was potentially going to be a challenge because I heard things like, we actually did a lot of the user research already before you got here. I'm not sure the thing we're currently working on is immediately actionable. So I heard this from the PM. Well, okay, so what that tells me is that the team didn't actually know how to strategically leverage user research. So how did I provide thought leadership? Well, I did 2 different things. The first thing I did was I actually audited the previous work that was done. Right, so the team said that they already had done research before. Was it actual user research, or did they think it was user research and it was actually something else? Right, was it filled with leading questions and somebody saying like, will you use our product? Or was it actually, a standardized process? So I looked at that and I was able to audit the process to know when we can get started. And the second part is that I identified low-hanging fruits and the cans of worms for the team. So the low-hanging fruits are things that you can immediately jump into. So things like usability testing or getting, pilot survey responses, something low so that the team is like, okay, a researcher is involved in our process and we can start talking to you and leveraging you and ask you questions. And the can of worms are existential things like, what is the meaning of life? How do we solve the future of fintech? How do we solve, the future of commercial real estate? You're like, I don't know, but let's have a conversation around that, right? So you want to do both of those things. And I was able to identify 2 or 3 different areas where the team had never done discovery work before, and I advised them to think about it for the coming quarters. So the 5th thing that I would have done was to set clear expectations of the team, right? The team wants to know, if I'm actually involved in doing user research, what does that mean? Like, how am I deeply involved? Am I jumping in the shallow end of the pool or the deep end of the pool? What does being involved in user research even look like? They don't know because it's their first time doing user research, right? So you want to set clear expectations here so nobody's backpedaling and nobody's saying, yes, I'd love to be involved, and then later on saying, just kidding, I can't do that, I don't have bandwidth in my day-to-days. So I knew that this potentially would be a challenge because I heard things like, I've never worked with user research before, I have no idea how to get started. Or I'm spending too much time on debriefs and synthesis and sitting on research. I have to do my job too. And this came from the designer who was like, I want to help with the research, but I'm in meetings all day. How does this work? So if you hear something like that, what that tells you is that maybe the team isn't clear about how you can engage with them and when they should step in to do more active roles in research and when they should just be passive and listen to insights. So to set clear expectations with the team, I did 4 different things. The first thing I did was I asked the team how they actually wanted to be involved. right? Like, do they want to sit in the sessions, take notes? Do they want to help formulate the questions as part of the plan? Do they want to look at the videos with me? Do they want to do synthesis? Whatever it is that the team wanted. And what I learned was that the interns wanted to be part of the entire process because it was the first time that they'd done it, and they just wanted to immerse to learn everything. But that the designer and the PM didn't want to be involved until the very end when they can come in to actually listen to the insights for the readout. So knowing that, I gave them what they wanted. So I involved the interns throughout the process, and then the designer and the PM were brought in at the end. I also showed examples of typical deliverables, right? Because if the team has never worked with user research before, they have no idea what a usability plan or report is. They have no idea what a survey would look like. They have no idea what a journey map or a persona is. So I actually gave them examples of past deliverables or deliverables I even found on the internet to say, if we engage in this process, this is potentially an output that you can get. Right? And so when you have something tangible to ground the conversation, people are more likely to engage with you and say, yes, like, let's sit down and go through this process. Then after that, I created a plan with clear, agreed upon timelines. I noticed that when you're moving fast and you're trying to break things, that people say, yeah, we'll just talk about it next week, or we'll figure it out in the beginning of the following month or something. Then quickly the next week or the following month is upon you, and you didn't agree to anything. So I think it's really important to set concrete timelines or actual dates, or even times if need be, so that you can know to go back and check in with the stakeholders, because that's the only way you can finish your projects. And also the fourth thing was to accept the learning curve, because if the team has never done user research before or even engaged with design, they don't know, they don't know what the entire process is like. They don't know the terms that you're dropping, so that you might have to explain the same thing over and over again until somebody understands. The sixth thing is I really wanted to meet people where they're at. Right? So something that we realized halfway through the process is the team actually can't absorb 100% of the information. It is too much. We can't do usability testing, usability audit, or heuristic evaluations, surveys, run pilots, like do field work all at the same time. Like from 0 to 100 is just too much. Nobody can absorb it. The team can maybe only do 30%, so let's put 100% of our energy into those 30%. Right? So you don't have to do a million things, you just have to do 1 or 2 immediate things so that the PM or the designer or your main stakeholders feel like they're getting value out of doing research. And once you are honing their gut for decision making and they're more likely to engage with you, then you can move up the percentages. So I knew that this was going to be a challenge because I heard things like, I'm overwhelmed by the user research we're doing. I want to do all this user research with a huge backlog of issues to fix too. This was really interesting because I heard this in the middle of the process, but at the beginning of the process I had asked, have you done any user research before? Do you have UX debt? And they were like, no, we don't have anything. But then in the middle, suddenly this appeared. So that was really interesting. What that told me is that there's a huge disconnect between what user research can do and what the organization is really realistically ready to react to. So how did I actually meet people where they're at? Well, the first thing I did was I actually stopped using research jargon and start speaking like a human. I know that this is something we talked about during lunch, but I really want to emphasize that point. It doesn't matter if you drop terms like usability audit or heuristic evaluation or benchmarking or stuff. It doesn't matter because you are just intimidating your stakeholders and you are alienating yourself from them, right? Whereas if you use terms that they understand, then they're more likely to engage with you. So instead of saying heuristic evaluation, maybe it's we are looking at our designs and comparing them to a set of standard guidelines to see if they're good or not, right? Or instead of affinity diagramming or clustering, it's we are looking at a bunch of insights that came out of research to see, if they actually fit into a larger theme or not. You don't have to use the terminology to get your point across. And when people felt like, they don't have to speak like a researcher to do research, they were more likely to participate in research. The second thing was I actually de-escalated the level of research. So as I was saying before, if the team can't absorb 100, only do 30%, and then see if they can absorb that. And you don't have to do 5 things at once. You just have to figure out the one thing you can do to immediately provide value to the team and execute on that really, really well. The third thing is I built in buffer time to react to research. When you are absorbing a lot of information, like you are today, you want breaks in between so that your brain can marinate and understand what is going on, right? So if you've never engaged with user research before, suddenly you're doing 10 sessions, 20 sessions, the team just can't even wrap their heads around what's going on. So what you want to do is you want to pause for a few days. Say, I'll give you the raw data. You can digest it, marinate it, stare at it, print it, put it on a wall, whatever it is that you need to do so that you feel like you are interacting with the data. And once you're at a good place, then we can do synthesis session. Or once we're in a good place, then we can do a report. Like whatever it takes to actually get the facts across to your team. And finally, as the team said, they have existing UX debt. So I try to prioritize the UX debt with them. So if the team feels like they're at least saturated because they're trying to, fight fires and you're just dumping something else on them, you want to work through the backlog first, help them prioritize existing and the most severe usability issues, and then focus on something more strategic. So the seventh thing that I would have told myself 5 months ago is you want to become a trusted advisor with the team, right? So just like an anxious flyer, like me, I'm a very anxious flyer, just like somebody like me looks to a flight attendant to see whether or not they should remain calm while they're in the air, your team doesn't know how to engage with user research, so they're probably looking to you to set the standard in terms of how to engage with user research. So if you're panicking, they're panicking. If you're saying, we're totally fine, we're totally on time and ready, then they're gonna stay calm. So you have to set the mood in the room, right? And you also have to create a sense of absolute psychological safety with the team so they can come to you and ask anything. And once you've created this positive feedback loop where people feel like they can ask you absolutely anything regarding research, then they're more likely to trust you as an expert. So I knew that this was potentially going to be a challenge because I actually heard somebody said, I'm worried this may be a dumb question. I'm not sure I'm taking notes the right way or I'm really understanding what to do next. You might also hear this as, a stupid question, but how do you do X, Y, Z? Or I don't want to sound dumb, but how do you do X, Y, Z? What that really tells you is that that person doesn't feel comfortable engaging with you yet on that level where you need to interact as close stakeholders. So if the team is unsure about how to do user research or how to engage with you, you are still earning the trust of the team. So how did I become a trusted advisor? Well, the first thing you want to do is you really want to be an active listener, right? The team doesn't expect you to jump in and immediately fix things. They want you to come in and listen to all their existing issues because they've had all this history before you joined and they just want you to know where they're at. And you can say, I don't know as much as you do when it comes to things like commercial real estate or design or product management, so show me what you know and I'll meet you halfway. The second thing I did was I was actually invested in the team because if you're working for a startup or a very close-knit organization, a lot of times people want to get to know you as a person. So I actually went out and I asked people for coffee and I'm like, I just want to know who you are. Like, do you have a dog? Do you have a family? What do you do outside of work? Like, what do you do beyond being an engineer or a designer or a PM? And once we got that flowing, people were more likely to come to me for research questions and to feel like they can open up to me. The third thing is you want to be really reliable, right? So this is their first contact with a researcher or a designer. So if you say you're going to do something, you have to do it. Like if you say you're going to execute on a research plan by a certain date, deliver. If you say we're going to find a certain number of participants, find it. Right? You want them to think of research as being strategic and research as being reliable so that you can knock it out right out of the gate. You also want to be enthusiastic because the team doesn't know how to react to something like user research. Is it something to be afraid of? Is it something that they should be excited about? They don't know. So they're looking to you like you're the flight attendant and you're setting that mood, right? And last of all, you want to be honest because the team is looking for you for great news. Like if you hear positive feedback from end users, they want to hear it. But they're also looking to you to deliver some of the negative feedback too. And something that I noticed is that the organization I work in, people are really positive and they want to deliver positive feedback, but that people have a hard time delivering negative news, or things aren't going the way we want it to go. So as a researcher, you have to have the intellectual courage to step up and say, not everything is going according to plan, but here are my thoughts on what we can do next. Because when you do that, you are opening up dialogue. You are creating psychological safety for the rest of the organization so that everybody else can also talk more honestly. And the last thing is, sometimes you just have to hang on, right? You can only show the value of user research over time. Sometimes the team is like, well, I don't immediately get the value of user research. You've been on this team for 2 or 3 months. I haven't seen what's going on. And you're like, well, let's be patient. Sometimes the value of user research comes with time. So I knew this was going to be a challenge because I heard things like, we tried user research or usability testing or sprint or whatever it is once, but it didn't work out, and nothing came of it. So I'm not sure we'll get much now. Well, okay, just because you did it once, it didn't work out, it doesn't mean that you can't try again. Circumstances are different, personnel is different, I'm here, things might be totally different now. So you just have to encourage your team to be patient and to give research more of a chance. So to clarify the value of research over time, the first thing I did was I recorded down the wins every single time I had one. Right, so during this weekly report out, I would say things like, we recruited 8 participants, or I have a top line report, or here's what I heard from the participant, and here are some nuggets that we learned. So every single week, the team got biteable sound bites of what user research is doing, and they can say, okay, I'm getting the value of user research every single week. The second thing I did was I quantified the value of user research. So as I mentioned earlier, right, the PM and the UX designer had done work about 8 to 10 months ago, but they didn't write down any of this work. So nobody else in the organization knew that they had done all this research. It's like if a tree falls in the forest and nobody heard it, did it happen? Well, if you did research and nobody knew you did research, did it happen, right? So I knew right away that we needed to find a way to track the value of research. So I helped this team build a user insights repository. So we did a heuristic evaluation, and we were able to quantify the insights that we got from the heuristic evaluation, assign severity scales, and figure out what kind of things we can immediately turn into design comps and what kind of things we can save for later. And the last thing was I let the quality of my work speak for itself until stakeholders convince themselves. Sometimes the value of user research becomes undeniable over time. So you don't have to be, you don't have to say user research is awesome and like kind of toot your own horn. Over time, your designer will convince themselves because their designs will have improved. Your PM will convince themselves because your roadmap will be clear and he'll have more resources. Or your eng lead will convince themselves because the design comps that came out of your research are able to be translated into something actionable. And the funny thing was, so after we built this research insights repository, the PM on the team and I actually spoke at an internal grassroots conference about our research process. I mean, the man literally stood up in a room filled with agile coaches and other PMs and said, look, research is awesome. You should incorporate research in your process. I mean, that's a huge win, having your PM say that in front of other PMs, right? So I felt pretty good about it. And here's a photo of me with other builders. And I'm drinking a Coke that says MVP. So, yeah. But that's not the only win, right? It's not only about speaking in internal conferences and getting to know people. There's also a UX-related OKR now for the next quarter. And we've built this user insights repository, and we have this insights review process so that the team is constantly thinking about usability. They're constantly thinking about ways to incorporate research more and more in the process. And having done a thorough usability audit as part of this quarter, now they can think about their strategic roadmap for next quarter. They're finally able to breathe and say, okay, we have all this UX debt that we've cleared. What can we do next, right? So yeah, so here once again are my 8 cranes, or the 8 ways that I figured out the UX readiness of my organization. So I would encourage you to take this list and audited for your organization as well. So what kind of things can you immediately do and to figure out where you need to do more heavy lifting when it comes to getting your team ready for research? And yeah, that's it. Special thanks to all the builders here in the crowd and also back in the office who helped with providing feedback for this talk. Thanks.
We probably only have time for 1 or 2 questions. So are any questions?
I was not really aware that the real estate industry was actually invested in UX at all, so this is fantastic. A lot of your advice, a lot of us I think have encountered along the way. Was there anything specific to this industry that you found that was posed a unique challenge to getting them to embrace user research?
I think the most immediate thing that I can think about is getting access to industrial brokers. Because the brokers don't want to talk to you. You are not Amazon, you are not Google, you are not helping them find a warehouse, sell a warehouse. They're like, I don't want to talk to you because you're not helping me with my bottom line with getting more commission. So finding key contacts in the business to then help us recruit and then persuade those industrial brokers to talk to us when we can incentivize them like properly through enough money was really an interesting challenge. So it had to be like we had to figure out a way to engage them with the actual features that we're testing so that they felt like they were able to have their thoughts heard and that we were actually running with their advice.
I have a question. So on number 6, you were saying that meet people at where they're at, and then a lot of the Koreans somehow sounds like a bit compromised for the actual team setting at the moment. So do you think those compromises somehow might actually influence the quality of the research results or postpone some certain kind of result from generating?
Yeah, so I think that that's like a valid question. I think it's less about compromise and more about understanding the communication style of your stakeholders. In the end, you're not doing research alone, right? You're not doing research for yourself. You're here to advocate for the end user, and you're trying to persuade a designer or a PM to run with your actions. But people make decisions based on emotions, based on their judgment of how you actually deliver something, and not based on facts or actual insights, or else we'd be more persuasive. Right, so I think part of it is not just winning them over with the quality of your work, but also winning them over as people. So I don't think of it as a compromise as much as it's like getting to know your stakeholders, getting to know your team, so that over time you can, succeed together.